So welcome to the Lindenberger Group Leadership Podcast. My name is Linda Weinzler, and I'll be the host for this discussion. With me today is John Pizutelli, and he's got a very exciting topic to talk with you about.
Thanks, Linda. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Today's topic, I want to talk about culture in organizations, but I want to do it in a way that may be a little different from what people are used to hearing. I think everybody, you know, I don't think there's going to be much argument if I say culture really matters. Decades ago there was the phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I think I'm preaching to the choir for most of this, but what I thought I'd do today is a little bit different. I want to look at scientific research, particularly in psychology, maybe a little in neuroscience as well. This is a topic I'm personally really fascinated by, and it's looking at the link between mood and performance. And I want to share a little bit of research. I want to talk a little bit about why this relationship exists and what are the implications for individuals working in businesses and organizations, but also as leaders who are looking for ways to improve the performance and engagement of their teams and the broader organization.
That sounds both really timely and very interesting. So please proceed, John.
All right, thank you. Um, the first thing that was really an eye popper for me is I was getting into this body of research. We all grew up with with these ideas in our heads that if you work hard, you'll be successful, and if you're successful, once you get there, you will be happy. Um, and so, it leads to things like no pain, no gain, and things like that. And that's the mantra for a lot of individuals and even a lot of companies. What we're finding out from decades of research, especially in the field of positive psychology, is that the relationship is actually flipped. It's not that hard work leads to success, which leads to happiness, but it's about feeling good on an individual or even on a group level leads to better performance. And so if you want to get better performance, either for yourself or from your team or organization, culture matters, mood matters, how people feel matters. Um, that's really the main point.
Hmm.
One of the things, and my background is in psychology, so this is why I've just it's been a lifelong interest of mine. Um, Most of psychological research really deals with some of the problems and challenges that people face, things like depression and anxiety, decades and decades of research. There's a small branch of psychology that's popped up over the last maybe 40 or 50 years called positive psychology. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, if you do a literature search, negative, quote unquote, topics in psychology outnumber positive ones by a ratio of something like 17 to 1. So it's a small but growing field. And one of the reasons why it's growing is because the real world results are so tangible and so evident. Um, Positive psychology is that part of psychology that really looks at how people learn and excel. It's basically the study of success, and the implications for businesses, for athletes, for artists, just across the board is really amazing.
It sounds like you're referencing Martin Seligman's work. Is that,
Yes, thank
yeah.
you. He's considered one of the fathers of positive psychology.
Mm.
Um, And there's really an interesting story about him that really helped shape my thinking as I approach culture and organizations. Um, he started studying things like optimism, and aspects of positive psychology back in the 70s. But in the late 80s, he started doing some work with MetLife, the insurance company. And at the time, he was working with them and their sales force. Their sales force was hurting. Um, it's such a challenging job anyway, but they were having trouble attracting and keeping salespeople. In fact, of their entire sales workforce, of all of the people they hired in any particular year, only half would be around by the end of that year. And
Wow.
after, and one only 1 in 5 would be back, would still be with MetLife by the time they got to year 4. And the company calculated that they were losing $75 million a year just on hiring costs.
Wow. That's a
And
lot.
yeah, it's staggering. Um, and one of the things that they do with their salespeople, well, at least they did at the time, is they give everybody a test of general knowledge and skills, and you don't get on the sales team until you pass this test. Martin Seligman got involved, and he actually gave them additional tests that are focused on optimism versus pessimism. And he found some really interesting research when he looked at salespeople who fell into the optimist category versus the pessimist category. Optimistic salespeople outsold pessimistic salespeople on
Hmm.
average by 37%. And when you look at the most optimistic people on the sales team, they outsold their pessimistic counterparts by 88%. So MedLife, of course, loved the results and they decided to start implementing this. So for the next couple of years, anybody who's considered for a Salesforce position also had to take some pre-work assessments that are getting at optimism. Well, and in fact, if someone took their main sales test and failed it, but they still scored high on optimism, they still got hired. They still got put on the sales team. And what
Hmm.
happened in year 1, after the initial study, real world examples, the optimistic, the most optimistic folks outsold the pessimistic ones by 21%. By year 2, that jumped up to something like 57%. So over the next few years, as MetLife kept instituting this new approach, not only did they not only did turnover plummet among the sales force, but MetLife gained they grew their market share by like almost 50%. It was phenomenal.
That really reinforces the idea that has been around for a while, but not everybody pays attention to it, that you hire for characteristics, not
Yes,
for skill sets. You can teach people to do things, but it's hard to teach somebody to be optimistic.
you're so right. This is one of the fundamental takeaways from all of this research. Um, so many people look for the blend of technical skills when they're looking to hire a candidate.
Mhm.
But what I think people really should do when they're hiring, when they're looking to bring new people into the organization, use the hiring process to help find those characteristics that are harder to train for. But we'll see as we talk more about this. Even things like the topics I'm talking about are learnable, are trainable. But it's so much easier when you're getting people through the door that have the mental skills, the emotional intelligence, the innate characteristics that just make success and high performance even easier, not just for themselves, but for the company.
So, John, I have a question. I mean, it's one thing to hire people for a certain characteristic, but you talked about the importance of culture and how it has a big impact. Even the most optimistic person placed in a culture that doesn't reinforce that positivity how do they, what can leaders do, basically, I guess is my question. What can leaders do to sustain that positivity, that optimism in their people?
Oh, there's so many things. There's so many things that can um, enhance people's mood and then the results that they get. And there are also so many things, of course, that can take away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people talk about culture in terms of the real positive um, traits, values, characteristics that the leadership of an organization wants to really propose and strengthen. But really, oftentimes, it's some of those downsides in an organization that really help shape the culture, often often to a greater extent than the positives. Let me give you an example. Here's another um, here's another uh, experiment that was really eye-opening for me. There's a guy by the name of Mark Roper. He started off as an engineer for NASA, and then he moved on to become an engineer and product designer for Apple. Very successful. Now he runs this online training company. He's really a phenomenal person. He did an experiment on a really, really large scale a few years ago. Um, he invited about 50,000 people for an online training program, um, under, with the message that anybody can learn to code. And he gave those 50,000 people a task, and it was write a code that will guide a robot through a maze. Now, um, it was a harder task than people realized, but he basically divided people into two groups without telling them which group they were in. Group number one, um, if they made a programming error, they automatically received a message that says, um, "You have failed. Please try again."
Hmm.
For the second group, they got a similar message, only their message was, "You have failed. You lost 5 points. You have 195 points left. Try again." Now, the thing is, these points were completely arbitrary. They were completely meaningless. But just that negative feedback had such an impact on people that when you look at the results of the two groups, the group that just said that they were just told, "Please try again," took them an average of 12 attempts before they finally gave up and quit, um, versus 5 attempts for the group that got these meaningless points. And he uses it to demonstrate how people look at negative consequences, how they look at failure, performance feedback, basically. And this is why it's important for cultures and organizations. Um, just as people really responds to positive feedback in striking ways. In this instance, they disproportionately responded to negative feedback in a way that really ramped up their own fears of failure, which then in turn affected their real world performance. Now we see the opposite is true in other research, time and time again. And in fact, there was a recent meta-analysis. This is a study that looks at all of the other studies and summarizes them. So
Mhm.
this was a recent meta-analysis that looked at over 200 different scientific studies, um, that that looked at this impact between mood and performance, that involved like 275,000 people. So it was massive look across a significant body of literature, and they all said the same thing. Basically, the better people feel, the better they do. Now, there's some reasons behind this, and some of those reasons can be found in neuroscience. I'll be really brief about this, but when we are in a workplace, or in any other parts of our lives, and we're feeling stressed, we're feeling nervous, we're feeling anxious, we're feeling worried, we're feeling under pressure, we are responding um, in that same part of our brain that our ancestors uh, they used to kick in for our ancestors when they would come across a saber-toothed tiger. It's more in the limbic system of the brain, the amygdala, where you're releasing adrenaline, cortisone, fight or flight syndrome. Now, and from an evolutionary perspective, it limits your range of thought for survival purposes. You don't have time to think. You just want to react in the moment. When we're in a positive mood, that's where the parts of our brain are kicking in with more dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, more pleasurable chemicals. And the parts of our brain that get stimulated are more in the prefrontal cortex that deal more with creativity, problem solving, higher order, more intelligent thinking. When we're in a better mood, we have access to a broader range of ideas that we don't usually have access to when we're feeling negative. So I know I go on about neuroscience. It's something I'm passionate about. But the bottom line is study after study after study shows that just small changes in somebody's mood to the positive side has big swings in their performance, and as a group, the performance of the team as a whole.
I can see how this approach can have a positive impact for both the individuals and the group. Really fascinating topic. Thank you, John.
Absolutely. Thank you.